Well, good day, everyone. Hope all is well, and just want to say Happy Mother's Day. Man, it is truly amazing that uh, God's given us every single one of us a mother to not only raise us, but also that we just have one, so that it's hard to actually express just how amazing it is to be able just to have that privilege. So I just want to say thank you to all the mothers out there, and if you're going through anything as far as parenting, if you have something that or maybe you're a mother, but maybe your kids are no longer living with you. We just want to say thank you for all that you've done to help raise a child into this world. And some mothers are alone. Some children do not have the father growing up with them growing up in the picture that they can cling to, and just sometimes the mother has to step up and sort of take the role of both. And so there's all these different instances of how mothers have blessed mankind. And it's truly amazing. Tonight, uh, I'd like to just give an update on my own mother, and I just let you know how that situation is doing. I am in Texas City right now, and things aren't looking too well. Her blood pressure's actually improved a lot, but uh, she just informed me a couple of days ago that she lost vision in her left eye, and anytime she gets up to try to go and move around a little bit, I'm not sure if it's just due to her blood pressure being low or whatnot, but uh, it's actually causing her to faint. She had a scare the other day, and we're just hoping that everything kind of goes well with that. I did get the opportunity to tell my mom about Jesus today, the good news, the gospel. And she's on the verge of maybe wanting to get baptized. And I'm just asking for prayer in that area, and I know she will be too. But I just want you guys to maybe encourage her, or maybe put in the comments, or just something to where she can see. Maybe text me, but just let her know how good God is, and that how much He truly blesses us with everything that we have. And we can't express how much that is and how grateful we are to have something like that. Well, before I actually dig into the text tonight, I want to go ahead and go to God in prayer. Again, I always say, please put something in the chat box. Let us pray for you. Let us know how things are going, and just if there's ever anything we can pray for, let's just if you can't put it in the chat box, I'll announce it. And before we finish, we'll go ahead and go to God in prayer one more time, just for that request. And I just hope that you guys would, take advantage of doing that. But let's go to God in prayer this evening. Father, you are truly, truly amazing. Lord, sometimes we can't always express how truly amazing you are with words. And the only thing that we can really say deep down from our heart that is thank you. Thank you for all that you've done. Thank you for salvation offered in your son Jesus. Thank you for saving a people like us and seeing us in a different way, seeing us in a way to where you chose to have compassion on a sick, sinful people as ourselves. Lord, please help us to serve you. Please help us to follow you. And please help us to obey you even though we would really rather do something else in the moment. Help us in our temptation. Please help us when Satan comes and starts giving us this opportunity to go against you that may seem right, that may seem quicker to get something accomplished, but it's not going to accomplish anything besides us getting in trouble. not just physically, but spiritually. Thank you so much for your heart. Please help us to have the same kind of heart that you do. Help us to look at the people of this world differently to where we have the same kind of compassion on them. Help us to have compassion for the lost. Help us to understand that they are like sheep without a shepherd. Uh, we hold the only thing that can produce them and allow them to be reconnected with you, Father, even though their sin has once disconnected them from you and may still remain like that. But help us, Lord, to understand that reaching out uh, isn't just preaching if we don't have the lifestyle and the life to practice what we say of you. Help us to do good in that area. Help us to please admit when we fail you. And um, we just so desperately want people to come to know you. Uh, Lord, I want to ask that tonight, if there's anything that is preventing us from hearing this message wholeheartedly, that you would please remove it from our lives. Help us to be sure that we have our absolute and complete focus of what you're trying to tell us this evening. But not only that, please help us to remember the things that we hear. Help it to not just go in one ear and go out the other. We need your help with applying what we hear tonight. Help us to be humble. Help us to treat your people differently when we would rather do something else ourselves. Uh, Thank you so much, Lord, just for Jesus and his sacrifice. Please help us to focus more on that. It's in his name we pray. Amen. Okay, well, church, this evening I actually do not have a second screen on me, so I can't often check to see how the stream is doing. So please forgive me if it does start to mess up. But I usually am able to check and see how it's doing without me, with the second screen. But I can't, and so I have to be able to scroll and do things just on one screen right now. So let's go ahead and dig into the text this morning. But before we do, let me go ahead and ask a simple question. Uh, do we sometimes struggle with being low? And what I mean by that is, do we sometimes struggle with taking the lowliest place or the lowest place whenever it seems like there's nothing to do besides elevate ourselves? And before I actually go into specifics, let me go ahead and just tell you guys, uh, in order for us to follow Jesus and to understand completely about who he is, but also help us to understand what he's capable of doing, we first need to have an understanding that we have a problem that needs fixing. Rarely do we ever know anyone that goes to fix a problem that they are unaware is there in their lives. But not only that, but the same thing with just anything. Rarely would anyone go to fix a problem that they don't know is there or that they don't realize is going to be dangerous if they don't fix the problem. Usually we want to fix the problem when it's causing our life some sort of conflict. But when we think everything is going okay, usually we don't stress to try and fix the problem because there's nothing we think that needs fixing. Well, here in the parable, and I'm going to go ahead and start reading. We're going to be, and this is our text this evening, we're going to be in the book of Luke, chapter 14, verses 7 through 11. I'm not going to actually be using my PowerPoint tonight. I keep struggling to go back and forth from it, and it was actually a little bit difficult trying to get everything I needed to make the PowerPoint this week, and it will continue most likely back to normal next week. But let me go ahead and just get into the text and just kind of elaborate on what I was saying. But here we're going to notice starting again in the text in chapter 7, as we go through these verses right here, we're going to get the context of what's going on through verses 1 and 6. But let me go ahead and start off with verse number 7 and just read until about verse number 11. It says, "So he told a parable to those who were invited. When he noted how they chose the best places, saying to them, when you are invited by anyone to a wedding feast, do not sit down in the best place, lest one more honorable than you be invited by him. And he who invited you and him come and say to you, give give place to this man, and then begin with shame to take the lowest place." So it's using an example of someone at a wedding feast who wants to go and sit at the higher places for the people at the wedding that are considered to be the more honorable people that show up. And whenever they sit down the place, another visitor comes that's more honorable than that person. Comes, well, the bridegroom, the person that is in charge of the wedding, tells him to go and sit at a lower position, and that other person that had to leave is actually most likely embarrassed that he had to leave. There's shame brought upon him. Verse number 10, "But when you are invited, go and sit down in the lowest place, so that when he who invited you comes, he may say to your friend, 'Go up higher.' Then you will have glory in the presence of those who sit at the table with you," because they're going to see that he is now considered to be more honorable. Going from a lower position to a more honorable position is definitely something to talk about. Continuing on, verse number 11, "Whoever exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted." So, a couple of the lessons that we have spoken about before: faith over fear, using the coronavirus to help in our response toward people. The things that we should be doing right now is humbling ourselves so that we can listen better to what God is trying to tell us, but also be in tune with the other people around us. It's very hard to do that when we are self-centered. So, just a couple of things. Jesus here, starting in verse number 1 of chapter 14, now what happened is he went into the house of one of the rulers of the Pharisees to eat bread on the Sabbath, and they watched him closely. Now, a couple of things. Here's just part of the setting of this parable. Jesus, he actually goes to eat at this house of one of the rulers here, the Pharisees, and he sees this man here with dropsy. And if you don't know what dropsy is, I'm going to go ahead and pull up a picture for a moment. But dropsy, I don't mean to gross you out too much. Dropsy is an old-fashioned term for edema. It's a swelling of the feet, legs, and face, and it's usually caused by kidney failure, and a couple of other things that may cause it is heart problems, etc. But it's whenever your body starts to retain fluid so much to where your parts start to swell up. I think it's a problem that I'm actually dealing right now with my own mother. I think she has some of the symptoms regarding that, and she's on dialysis. Dialysis actually helps out with this problem, and but it doesn't really fix the problem. So Jesus right now, he notices this person with edema or dropsy. Verse number 2, "And behold, there was a certain man before him who had dropsy, and Jesus answering spoke to the lawyers and the Pharisees, saying, Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath?" Again, from what we know about the Sabbath day from a couple of lessons beforehand, the Sabbath day was a day that was supposed to be kept as a day of rest. But a lot of the time, the Sabbath had rules that wanted people to understand about God's mercy in the process of doing so. But man has made this day of rest into a day of legal difficulty for people. And what I mean by that is the people actually on this day, they were afraid to move even just a little bit of their body for fear of working and breaking the Sabbath. But we notice a little bit later how Jesus deals with this topic right here, because what he is saying is, and he's going to respond to their ways of legalism. And he asks, and he tells them a question. And it says, "Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath?" But they kept silent. And he took him and healed him and let him go. And then he switches the gears on him a little bit in verse number 5, and he says, "Then he answered them, saying, Which of you, having a donkey or an ox that has fallen into a pit, will not immediately pull him out on the Sabbath day?" And they could not answer him regarding these things. So again, these were things they couldn't respond, most likely because they weren't sure if it could have been a conviction issue. But I think one of the main ideas as to maybe why they didn't respond is because they knew there was something about the situation that was going to maybe bring to light their hypocrisy on the matter. So it's not right for them to go and break the Sabbath, apparently, to go and try and pull up one of their own livestock and save them from falling into the pit. Yes, that would be considered working, but he's also using the same understanding to where, well, the same way you showed mercy not only for this animal here, but you showed mercy for yourself because, hey, your livestock is your livestock. You have to try and protect these things. But also here with this other instance, how much more important is this man's life than your livestock falling into a pit? And yet you're willing to break the Sabbath on this day. Again, air quotes. You're willing to break the Sabbath on this day to rescue this ox that's fallen into this pit, but yet you're telling me and you're trying to nitpick at me for trying to heal this man and show him the mercy of God and what he will do for someone to give him this rest. Again, Jesus, every time he wants to give him this, show them something spiritual, he always uses a time such as these to where man has an understanding that only comes from the physical to bring up something that is spiritual in their life. So again, they were telling him, they were doing one thing, but telling him and also attempting to find every reason to convict him and to also maybe sentence him and put him to death by doing something else. So again, they were not practicing what they were preaching. They wanted him to, they expected him to act a certain way that they were not doing their own self. So something else I'd like to bring out in all this. When Jesus notices with this little instance about the Sabbath day, whenever he actually he says this little part here about the ox falling into the pit, he actually brings up another point right here. And actually, as I was first reading, I was like, well, how does this have anything to do with the text? How does them having a wedding, going to a wedding feast have anything to do with what is going on here? But at the time, they were actually at the wedding feast. Go back to number 1, them going into the house and eating bread and such. Well, Jesus is now using this example as to what the reality is in the moment to bring up. Okay, well, to bring up this lesson about staying humble, being humble, and choosing to humble yourself rather than exalting oneself just because their power and their position. So continuing on, the setting here again, it's this wedding feast. But at this wedding feast, Jesus actually, even though if we go back to the first part of chapter 14, it says, and that they watched him closely. But then you find out a little bit later in verse number 7, it says, he told a parable to those who were invited when he noted how they chose the best places, saying to them. So even though they were watching Jesus closely, he was also still watching them closely in the process of that. So in this understanding, I actually have a little picture here I'd like to show you just to kind of give you more of a clear understanding about the seating arrangements that were going on. And if you guys remember how our building used to be. We used to have a table that kind of sat like this. But at this table here, um, at this table right here, it's actually called the table, the triclinia, or the Grecian table. But it had three sections. We notice right here they were placed together, but it forms this flat-bottomed U, and this space right here was enclosed. And it was actually not occupied. As I'm talking about right here in this middle part. It's actually not occupied. It was actually left vacant for the servants that might want to enter here and also attend some of the wants of the guests who reclined just here at the table. These little seats right here at the side of the table, it wasn't like a table and chairs. These were actually places to where people laid down to eat their food. But the servants would go up and just attend to the guests that arrived. So that's kind of why the table was left open in this part right here. But this center seat that we see on each of these little tables, to the left, the right, and also to the one up top, it was actually the place of honor. And this was a struggle here for some of the people that would go to sit down, because there were other people who were not supposed to be in the place of honor sitting at these seats. And Jesus right here, if you notice, there's this little place, I don't know how good you can see the table, there's this place right here where Jesus was sitting, and again, he noticed how other people who weren't supposed to be there were taking the places of honor. And he was telling them, well, hey, you got to be careful, because uh, there are others who might come and take these seats, and you're going to shamefully have to leave whenever you find out you cannot be there very long, because you're not one of those people of honor. Now, even though someone more honorable may have been invited, the big idea here was the host will ask them to move. And not only just ask them to move, but also direct them to sit in the more in the more lower position, or the more lower spot. So we have to make sure, at least, or in this, they were trying to make sure that this didn't happen, and Jesus is telling them, well, to avoid this from happening, we have to make sure that we don't just go with a means to exalt ourselves. We have to go with the means of with humility. Whenever we as Christians choose humility, we're able to avoid being caught in these certain situations where, when we let our pride get the better of us, and maybe we start to think of ourselves more highly than we ought to, it saves us from the embarrassment to come whenever someone else that is supposed to be of honor comes in and brings to light how how less honorable we are than them. And what I mean by that is, Jesus is the person who God wants us to look at. He's the person, at least here at this wedding feast, he was the one who had the most honor. And I'm not saying the wedding feast was specifically for him, but he also was one of the people that had the most honor, and others couldn't even realize that, because they were so focused on getting their flesh fulfilled, being seen, being the ones in the seats of honor, the seats of fame. They wanted to be the ones who looked the part, but weren't actually the part. Weren't actually the part. In God's eyes, they weren't actually the part. In human eyes, they wanted to look more of something than they actually were. I actually wrote something I'd like to read to you guys, and it actually describes a little bit about this text right here. I have this tendency to journal things. I like to try and apply as many things with a certain text to my heart as I can, and not only that, but I like to practice and focus and try to figure out what can I do to live these things out during the week before I get a chance to preach and look at this lesson. So something I'd like to point out in this, in this journal right here, this entry, I was trying to focus on this text and notice specifically about one thing about how do I view God and what does it say about God. If I were to read something like this, whoever exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted. Now, looking in, I'm going to go ahead and read this for y'all. It says, before speaking this parable, Jesus healed a man with dropsy, and however, instead of focusing on the miracle that occurred, uh, they couldn't stop focusing on their mission of trying to find flaw in Jesus. So one thing that brings this out, not only with the man with dropsy, but also just refusing to humble ourselves in general. Whenever we do that, we start missing the point, because what we do is we try to focus more on the sins or the wrongdoings of others. We try to look at others' flaws to try and compare ourselves and make ourselves look more highly than we actually are. If they were more in tune with Jesus, and they, again, this was someone who just healed a man right in front of them, and yet they were only focusing on the laws that he was breaking. They were only focused on healing, on his healing and him breaking the Sabbath. But whenever what is actually going on here was they could not be in tune with what Jesus was actually doing, because their mind had been so puffed up with them wanting to be the ones to be the most righteous, it actually got in the way of them being able to do that. They couldn't focus. They couldn't see that they had the Son of God sitting right in front of them, and it was pitiful. It was ignorant. They put themselves in a position to where they were not only pridefully rejecting the only way that was able to bring them life, but they were also looking for anything they could to avoid the conviction that came from his quotes about them. How on earth are you going to convict someone who's not doing anything wrong? But the only reason as to why they were only looking at the pride at the wrongdoings of others is because they could not find flaw in their own life, because they didn't think there was any. Again, it's that same idea with trying, or rarely will one fix a problem that they don't realize is there. When you don't realize that there is a problem in our life, then we're not going to do what we need to do to try and fix it. So one of the ways here that I've learned, and of course this actually goes from what this lesson about is trying to figure out how we can remain low whenever there's many different opportunities to elevate oneself. And in order to do that, we have to make sure that we are completely tuned in and focused on Jesus. And what does that do for us? When you focus on Jesus, it allows you to be placed in the appropriate mindset. I can't tell you how many times I've focused on Jesus, but I couldn't focus on Jesus without thinking about how much I needed him. How much I need him constantly, because I'm always messing up. I can't tell you how many times I've focused on Jesus, and not only got to where I'm focusing on him and realizing my room for growth, but I'm also recognizing how much I need the life that is only found in him, because none of this other stuff is working. I can't tell you how many times and how many things I've tried to put into my own life to try and get me to be filled up, just to be left empty again. But whenever I seek him and I find him and I search for him and I try to fill myself up with him, I'm complete. I don't need anything else. I'm not lacking anywhere. Every other thing that we have here that we try to fill ourselves up with always leaves us empty and dry, because it always runs out. We always need more of it, and then just to find out that every time we need more and more and more of it, and then whenever it's finally done with, we're not satisfied anymore. Christians, let's make an effort. Let's make an effort. We have to make sure that when the opportunity comes to uh, focus on Jesus as Lord, as King, as the provider of our lives, uh, we have to make sure that we're not going in with an unrealistic measuring stick. when we go in looking at Jesus, not looking at self, and we compare ourselves to Jesus and maybe only look and see, well, and just say to ourselves, well, I can think of all these people that need to do this. Maybe we can think of in our mind some of the people that need to practice some of these things. But when we go in there not looking at ourselves and we can't find growth when looking at Jesus, something is deeply wrong spiritually in our heart, in our mind. Well, we have to be brought low. So focus on Jesus. Make sure that whenever we do that, that we are looking for growth with the mindset that says, uh, "I can't be good enough. Thank you for making me good enough. Please help me to be better, uh, because I'm a sinner. I need you. I need you in my life." The next thing that I want to point out in my little journal is that this verse here about um, whoever is um, whoever exalts himself, looking at verse 11, will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted. When speaking to the scribes and the Pharisees, uh, this was a fundamental principle, a general truth that many of them already accepted and knew about. Jesus, he's actually quoting something that they already knew about, but it was actually one of the Lord's favorite phrases right here because it expressed how much uh, they have to uh, be brought down so that they can see that they need room for growth. If you want, let me go ahead and turn to the book of Psalms. I'm going to go ahead and read for you chapter 18, looking at verse number 27. Let me go and get there real quick. Psalm 18, verse 27. You save the humble, but bring low those whose eyes are haughty. Let me go and read that in the New King James. This one I'm in right now. For you, for you will save the humble people, but will bring down haughty looks. For you will light my lamp, the Lord my God. I will enlighten my darkness. For by you I can run against a troop, but my God, I can leap over a wall. As for God, his way is perfect. The word of the Lord is proven. He is a shield to all who trust in him. So this also brings out this understanding. We have to trust in the Lord, but sometimes when we are, which I mentioned before in previous lessons, when we're only concerned about the things that we can do for ourselves, we start to think, well, why do we even need to trust in the Lord? Again, when we can just go get it, whenever we can just go and do things that might provide temporary satisfaction, but not only that, quick satisfaction, what's the real need to try and find anything to try and cure that at a slower level? But then again, we are always going back for more. Uh, there's also something that we learn about pride that's dangerous. Again, I can't tell you how much I struggle with my own pride. Sometimes I want to argue. Sometimes I just hate the fact that I can't get my response in when somebody else says something that might be wrong about me. Sometimes I want to try and respond in a way that is worldly. If somebody does something wrong against me, I have this quick tendency to want to go and get revenge or avenge the other person that was done wrong too. But in Proverbs chapter 16, verse number 18, and it's a favorite verse that many of us all know, it says, "Pride goes before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall." A little bit later, in chapter 29, looking at verse 23, it says, a man's pride will bring him low, but the humble in spirit will retain honor." Now, the danger of pride, it's not just used here in a social setting. But it's actually used, the danger part of it is used because our relationship with God is affected. When we focus more on self and the things that we can do for ourselves, God is actually, He's removed from the picture. Why have a God that, or why focus and say we need a God when we can just go and do everything ourselves? But in reality, the only things we can do for ourselves actually will hurt us if we do it too much. The things that we do for ourselves will keep us running dry, will keep our cup will make our cup keep going empty. With God, it's overflowing because everything that is found in God through Jesus Christ is everything that we need in our life to fill us up completely and wholly spiritually. We don't need anything else spiritually, and we're not going to be left empty when it comes to Christ. But all these other things that are worldly things that we think we can replace for with spiritual living. Again, I'm not sure how we can think that the physical will satisfy the spiritual. But all these other things will eventually get us to a point to where we start to run dry in the process of everything. So, because of all this, so what? What do we as Christians need to do? In Colossians chapter 3, looking at verse number 12, let me go ahead and get there. It actually mentions about clothing ourselves in humility. Let me go ahead and start reading. It says, and I quote, bearing one another and forgiving one another. Therefore, as the elect, and I'm in verse number 12. Therefore, as the elect of God, holy and beloved, put on tender mercies, kindness, humility, meekness, and long suffering. I believe it is the NIV. If you want to go ahead and read out the NIV, it talks about how instead of put on, it talks about how we should clothe ourselves. Clothe yourselves with compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. In 1 Peter chapter 5, looking at verse number 6, it says, humble yourselves, therefore, under God's mighty hand, that he may lift you up in due time. And this is right after it's talking about, trusting the elders and things like that. But this is also talking about humility, because once we can be humble, then we can respond in a way to where our pride will not allow us to go against someone else's wisdom and instruction. When we think we have things figured out already, and so much to where it could even be to where maybe there's nothing going wrong in the moment about what we're doing, but when God says it's wrong, eventually it's going to catch up to us. The next thing I have here, Philippians chapter 2, looking at verse number 3. Go and get there. It says, do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourselves. Mine says, but in lowliness of mind, let each esteem others better than himself. But look right here in verse number 1. It says, therefore, if there's any consolation in Christ, if any comfort of love, if any fellowship of spirit, if any affection and mercy, fulfill my joy by being like-minded, having the same love, being of one accord, and of one mind. So again, right here, it's speaking about a little bit later. That's actually where the famous verse is about. Let this mind be in you, which was also in Christ Jesus. But it's talking about how humility binds us together in love. If I am humble, then there's nothing that I'm going to do that is going to violate the unity that we have with one another in Jesus. So we have to make sure that we stay humble because humility controls our ability to respond. It controls our ability to listen, but it also controls our ability to make sure we actually get the bigger picture about what's going on. What I mean by that is if we act in pride, we're not able to understand about what the possible consequences are for our actions without humility. Humility also not only makes you tune in and listen better, but it actually allows us to take in and be more responsive to wisdom and actually allow our hearts to better understand the wisdom and why things are, at least why somebody else is saying this before we actually go out and do it. The last thing that I have here, and it's actually in Titus chapter 2, 3, Titus chapter 3, verse number 2. And it says, "For we ourselves were once foolish, disobedient, deceived, serving various lusts and pleasures, living in malice and envy." Actually, I'm sorry, I said verse number 2, not 3. Let me go ahead and start in verse number 2. "To speak evil of no one, to be peaceable, gentle, showing all humility to all men. For we ourselves were also once foolish, disobedient, deceived, serving various lusts and pleasures, living in malice and envy, hateful and hating one another." So through this simple parable right here, Jesus taught us the most important truth, the need to be humble in our relations with God and those around us. Humility, again, it's not something that is popular in our culture. It's considered to be a sign of weakness by many. There's also people that say, "Well, nice guys finish last." Well, we don't get anywhere with morals. But it's all about the fast life. It's all about doing all we can to please ourselves while hurting other people in the process. Maybe even doing things that are illegal in the process. But these things also will come around to us. And if you haven't seen somebody getting arrested before, or maybe someone finally getting what they deserve, God has a way of humbling us to where we're going to listen to Him, but He has a way of humbling us through the consequences of our actions. We're not as big and bad as we thought we once were whenever the handcuffs are being put on our back. So we have to remember that God is watching. We have to remember it is He who says, looking at Isaiah chapter 57, verse number 15, "For thus says the high and lofty one who inhabits eternity, whose name is holy. I dwell in the high and holy place with him who has a contrite and humble spirit, to revive the spirit of the humble and to revive the heart of the contrite ones." If we desire to serve the Lord and we desire the Lord to dwell with us, we have to learn how to walk humbly before Him. Micah wrote, in chapter 6, looking at verse number 8, "He has shown you, O man, what is good, and what does the Lord require of you?" Again, these couple of things, these three things right here, but to do justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. So we have to make sure that we give God what He deserves, and that is humility. He wants us to listen to Him, but He gives us the grace that we need to allow us to understand our sinfulness, our imperfection, our reason for needing Him, but also the reason as to why we understand that we can't do it on our own. And that grace right there is something we didn't deserve. He still chooses to give it to us anyway, even though we've messed up. We don't deserve it, but somehow He's still looking at us with the compassion that only comes from Him living like us here on the earth. Aren't you thankful for Jesus? Aren't you thankful that He lived with us? Know how flawed we are. Know how much we mess up. But so amazing. But we're never going to feel like we need Him or need God if we can't stay humble. So I want to challenge you this week. The next time an opportunity to elevate ourselves surfaces, I want you to understand that by doing so uh, becomes an addiction. Once we do it, we keep doing things that revolve around just us. But I also want to challenge you that the next time that these opportunities to surface or to elevate ourselves come up and surface, that we choose to walk the other direction. We cannot afford to be numb to the needs and to the hurts of this world. There are people that are lost that are going to die. They're going to go to hell because they don't have Jesus. But we have to make sure that, and I know it's kind of a harsh teaching, but it's true. So we have to make sure that we stay humble so that we can feel compassion, feel as somebody else is feeling. We can't be in tune to the needs of other people when we're only focused about the needs of ourselves and the things that we want. Thank you very much. Let me go ahead and check the chat box. I don't see anything on the chat box that says that we should be praying for anything, but again, just keep those that were mentioned this morning in our prayer, or sorry, this at the beginning of this message, our prayer in your prayers. But also want you to be sure that you pray for one another. Be sure we pray for not just one another, but for our humility. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. God bless.